The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian.
Well, it's another episode of HR Stories podcast. However, we're twisting things around. We don't have one big long story, so we're breaking it up. This is kind of our 3-question story episode. So it's not really a Q&A, but we have a crazy story and a crazy question. Well, I don't know if they're crazy. It's HR. Maybe it's seriously crazy.
It's always crazy, Chuck. It's always crazy. By the way, this is John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian, your co-host for the HR Stories podcast. And we're just trying to make HR a little bit fun and also trying to be curious with our thoughts. And I love when you send me these stories, Chuck. I thought it was a really good way to kind of get into, and these are the questions I think we have as HR professionals and actually leaders. How do we deal with this stuff? And what's right, what's wrong? So what's your first question, Chuck?
Yeah, well, it's really, in a lot of ways, this is HR in the news too. But John, let me ask you, could demanding excessively long shifts from employees land your company in legal hot water?
All right. So demanding long shifts, there's no problem with that, right? We can demand, right? We can have mandatory overtime. There's no rule that says we can't have mandatory overtime. I guess you could, right? Maybe there's an ADA concern. Could it be discrimination? This seems like it could happen, but I don't think on the surface of it, just demanding shifts, asking people to work long hours. Yeah. I go back to my theater days when we were putting in 20-hour days, could get you in trouble. Just on the surface, right. I don't think.
Right. And what happens in the HR Stories podcast, there's always more to the story. So this just came out April 22nd, the other day, as we record this, April 2024. The headline was a female paramedic's 96-hour shift may have violated Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which you're like, what? Yeah, but the court said that because here's the deal. Was she treated more harshly because you were sniffing down the right trail, John? Was she treated more harshly than her male counterparts?
Okay, so this was a female paramedic.
Yes.
And the question is now, was she being treated differently? Some similarly situated employees.
So a federal district court ruled this past April 15th, and this is out of Arkansas, that the city in Arkansas may have unlawfully discriminated against a female paramedic when the fire chief changed the schedule and required her to work 2 back-to-back shifts. Hey, well, that's okay, I guess, but the chief then releases a new schedule, requiring the paramedics to work 48 on and 24 off. And I've seen that in fire departments also. But during the switch from the old schedule to the new schedule, this one female paramedic would have to work 2 consecutive 48-hour shifts. And she sues. And she says, you know what? Based on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you're discriminating against me because I'm female. So how, what, where, it just blew me away. So I read more into this, and, she basically is saying that, that making her work these many hours and not making any of the male counterparts work those hours was it was an adverse action towards her and raised an inference. They inferred of discrimination. She's treated more harshly than similarly situated male employees.
So was
And
she? So was she? So did the manager say, "Hey, I'm doing this because you're a female"? Was there direct like, "We're doing this because of that," or was
no, they basically couldn't show that there was a reason that she, as the only female, had to work these hours, and why the males of the group could not work. And it has gone back and forth, and but the ultimate thing here is it's not about paramedics. And it's not about working long hours, but it is all about treating someone unfavorably or unequally because of their sex. And the whole similarly situated concept really helps courts make these appropriate comparisons between to coworkers and to say, okay, they're similarly situated, but this person was treated differently. And it comes down to really unequal treatment and the D word that you always like to throw out there.
Whoa, which word is that? Documents. I thought you were going somewhere else.
Documentation.
Yeah, right. And so that was my question for you. Was the reason that this person was on this crazy 96-hour shift, was it documented that there was a specific reason that that person was picked?
No, it was not documented. There's no reason. And in fact, what she presented was more evidence saying she was treated more harshly than her male coworkers. She was the only one that had to do such things as switch stations daily, to cover shifts and things like that, where her similarly situated males were not. So she was able to show that there was some other precedent and other things going on. So this was the final straw.
Yeah, but the big thing there is the documentation, right? So if there was a reason that this individual was doing these other things, and they were like, this is the reason, you're new, so you're the one that's going to have to do these things, or you're the one with the expertise, so we need you to do this, and that was documented, they probably would have had a lot better. The city would have been in better shape. So again, my lesson here is, right, because there's a lesson in every story you tell, is documentation is key, and treating similarly situated employees the same is also, right? Those are the two lessons, right? That's the two lessons I should walk away.
So my second story, we met John a couple of years ago teaching class. And one of the classes we were teaching was the managing virtual employees, and we were working for a seminar company. And you and I have had many conversations over the years about return to office and how some countries are doing it well, some aren't doing it well. But here's a question for you. Headline question, shall we say, is the return to office, RTO, there's even an acronym now for it, RTO, are the RTO policies inadvertently creating a boys club that benefits more men than women? And our companies, or how can these companies address this as maybe a fairness issue, or to ensure fairness? So I don't know, John, RTO policies, are they creating a boys club?
This, right? Or am I thinking about this, right? Because we think about, my first reaction is, how could that be? But let's look at this. Let's break this down, right? And so in our society, who are the caregivers in our family, right? And so if we look at that, typically the female partner is the caregiver. And so that means maybe they're taking care of kids, maybe they're taking care of parents. And so they're using the hybrid or remote work as a way to manage and be flexible and do all those things where maybe the male partners aren't doing those things. I can question some of that, but maybe the male partners aren't doing that. And so then we're asking people to come back in the office. And that means return to office. That means we're sacrificing some of that. And the female partners are more likely to say, no, I'd rather work from home.
Yeah,
that's the way they think of it. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know. They tell the stories, so we kind of get some more information on this.
Well, it is more of different experts and situations weighing in. But you are correct. You really are. Once again, you're sniffing out the direction that we're headed here. Because early in the pandemic, a lot of researchers, remember, work experts, they were like, "Hey, remote work," and then obviously later hybrid work benefited women more so. In other words, women were the ones often asking, who will look over the kids? And I get it. Gender roles have changed, and they continue to change as society progresses in one way, or maybe digresses in other ways. Who knows? But women also often shoulder the responsibility of caregiving also for elderly parents. But as time is going on, men are, they're finding out going back to the office in greater proportions than women. So a lot of women are still seeking remote and hybrid work disproportionately to a lot of men that are wanting to go back to the office. So
is there a study cited in the article about that?
Yeah. So there's this company. It's called Lean In and McKinsey report, and it was Women in the Workplace 2023 that said men are benefiting disproportionately from working on site. This one lady, and I don't know her first name, but it was something Fairchild. She says, think Mad Men, like that show Mad Men. There are still veins and strains of that. And unfortunately, in the data set, they're seeing that emerge now. Like, men are more likely to say they knew about decisions affecting them and their workload when they get into the work office, into the workplace. They feel more connected to the organization's mission. And I got to tell you, and I've talked about this, and you and I have talked about this, is there are, whether it's men or women, people that go into the office because a lot of times the big boss is in the office. Big boss sees people in the office. Oh, look at Johnny doing a great job. Look at Sarah doing a great job. And they forget about the people at home that are doing just as great work. But if more men are going in the office, then it's becoming, look at John, look at Steve, look at Bill, look at Chuck. So I just found that interesting, that it may be creating these boys clubs. That was the whole gist of the story.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think your last point there is so true, is as leaders in organizations, it is very easy for us to be comfortable with the people that are around us, right? We're more connected to them. We're going to go and lunch in the cafeteria, the break room. We're going to see them and go, oh, that reminds me. And I think we talked about this in our remote class about how to manage remote employees. Is you got to double your efforts. You got to go out. You got to talk to those individuals. You got to make those things happen, because otherwise, I think this is happening, right? And so we find that there is isolation at home. And if you're not reaching out and you're not making those connections, I could see where the remote employee would have less advantage than the in-house employee. And if that's true, if what they're finding in the research, what it sounds like is more female workers want to be remote or hybrid because of their caregiving things that they have to do, then that's going to happen, right? And so again, what I'm thinking about in my head, Chuck, is how do I, if I am that person at home, how do I connect and make sure that people aren't forgetting about me and doing that? And I'm going to take extra effort to make that happen, right? So we need to make sure that we're doing that ourselves, right? It can't just be the company. We have to go and do our own thing as well. I love that you brought that, because that's such a great concept and article on that and kind of looking at that.
Yeah, well, what you just said, just so you know, there's actually a term for it. It stems out of that recency basis. It's called proximity basis. Okay, similar to recency basis, but that's when managers first consider in-person workers for promotions while passing over remote workers for similar opportunities. And I do know, I've heard this, and I see this in the article. Dell said starting in 2024 that workers are going to be either classified remote or hybrid. And remote workers are going to have a more difficult time getting promotions. And I guess Dell actually came right out and said that Dell workers can stay remote, but they're not going to get promoted. This was an article from Business Insider in March 2024. And well, there we go. Yeah. That's a whole other story for the HR Stories podcast.
We could get into that conversation altogether and how to do that, right? And we did that. We did a really good story. I forgot what podcast that was, but we talked about the one manager who was like, they were doing those funny videos trying to get people back in the office. And
yes,
it's just not the way to do it.
They were kind of creepy, weird.
Telling people that they're not going to get promoted because they're a remote worker really devaluates the remote worker. So that's my zip it up, shut it up, drop on. All right, what else? What's our last story of the day?
To poach or not to poach? You may say, is that the question? But I will say, are no poach agreements protecting businesses, or are they stifling employees' growth? You know, I worked for a company in the past, and people would leave for a competitor. And I remember the owner wanted me to call up the other. You can't take our people. This is wrong. We're going to sue you. I'm like, we can't do that. Like, there's not, you know, we don't have any agreements with these folks. We don't have contracts with them. We're in employment at will state. There are no poach agreements, John.
Yeah. So
some companies have them.
So poaching is different. Is different than. Now I'm blanking on the term, but that's different than a non-compete agreement.
Yes. Poaching would be like, oh, look, there's a franchise, another, like imagine McDonald's and different franchisees, and I like that manager at that franchisee's McDonald's. I'm gonna poach him. I'm gonna take him. He's right. You know, that's what poaching is. And as I get into this story, that may explain a little bit more. So this is Jackson Hewitt, big time tax preparer company. They have to pay $10.8 million to settle no poach allegations. So what they were doing was they required franchisees not to agree not to solicit or hire employees from other franchisees, which on the surface, that sounds good because you could have 2 or 3 Jackson Hewitts in an area, different strip malls. And so if you're hiring people from your co-franchisee, it causes all kind of problems overall.
Yeah.
So they said, hey, we're going to have all of you sign this no poach agreement. Well, it backfired on them. And they and the reason it backfired on them, John, not because that's mean or it's just, it actually centered on the a conspiracy, a potential when two or three or people get together, a company says, hey, we're going to conspire to do a certain thing, keep wages down or whatever. That's what this was. Yeah. So basically the allegations were that they conspired to suppress employee wages with job mobility through no poach agreements.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I'm working for this franchisee. He's not paying me that much. I could go down the street or to the next town, make more money with another Jackson Hewitt, but I'm not allowed. And so so that was suppressing growth, and it impeded or restricts the movement of employees between Jackson Hewitt and its franchisees. And also, John, it restricted anyone that worked at the corporate office from working for a franchisee, or anyone at a franchisee finding a better job at the corporate office. It suppressed competition, decreased employees' job options, depressed their wages, and especially if the lost opportunities were superior to the current job, right? It was a good promotion. And that's what the complaint asserted. And
that's
Department of Justice, and you mentioned it, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, got involved in that.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because you think about the franchisees, right? And they're typically defined by a geographical area, like, okay, you can do this, that kind of stuff. And so we're never going to put another franchise in your area and that kind of stuff. But McDonald's, Jackson Hewitt, where in today's world, I may be in one city and then the next city over, there may be another one and I'm an employee and I'm working at this level, but there's a manager role over there. And that franchise was like, oh, I would love to have you, but I can't hire you because of this no poach agreement. I can't steal resources from that other individuals because that's going to hurt their business. And so, gosh, and I love how they went after it and to talk about the conspiracy and the push to keep the wages down. It's kind of a, what's the word? It's a monopoly, kind of like, hey, we're monopolizing accountants, right? Okay, so we're going to monopolize. You can't do that. You can't move around. And I think, so from my understanding, that no poach agreement is really from the same type franchisee type businesses. And it's not going to happen. Like, I can't have a no poach agreement. I guess I could have a no poach agreement with other restaurants in my area, like going, okay, you're not going to poach from me and I won't poach from you. I just think that's not good for the individual. And I don't think that's good for the business as a whole.
Well, I think overall, John, if two restaurants decide to do it, let's say it's two brothers that own two different, and they agree with each other, or maybe who knows, right. But there's something called the Sherman Act, and Section 1 of the Sherman Act overall bars any contract, combination, or conspiracy that unreasonably restrains the competition for workers' labor. And that's what no poach agreements kind of grew out of as far as being illegal. So it could be any firm, two law firms that say we're not going to poach from each other. That could be illegal. To poach or not to poach, I think
I like my eggs fried.
Not a question.
If you're asking, I like them fried. My eggs fried. Those were great. Those were great headline. Those are great headline stories. And that's what we're going to name this episode, the headline stories.
I love it. Okay.
And so I do really think that I love that. And I think it helps us as listeners because each one of them had a lesson, right? And so the first one was making sure that we're documenting, make sure that we're treating employees similarly in similar situations, not discriminating against one of the many protected classes. The second one was, it was more of a discussion, but was like, how are my policies that I'm putting in place hurting different people or different aspects of the people? In this case, it was gender, it was male and female, but I could see it being younger and older. It could be different religions, right? And so again, thinking about policies and what I need to do, am I doing anything that could harm the female candidates or employees in this case? And then the last story was really about creating unfair advantages for our employees, right? And so not poaching, because maybe that's advantageous for me as a company, but that could get me in trouble in hot water in terms of that, right? And so I love this. Thank you so much.
Amazing. And what's amazing, folks, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm looking at John, and he was not taking notes. He summarized those 3 stories from memory. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
John
you. Well, I do pay attention to what you say, Chuck. You are a very important voice in my head. And so I'm always listening. When I'm doing things, Chuck, your voice comes up. I'm like, ooh, is that the right thing? Or is Chuck going to get me on wrong with that one? Right. You're reaching out. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where, as we said, there is a lesson in every headline and every story. Please make sure you're liking us. Please let your HR friends and your leaders let them know. We got some big news coming up. We can't announce it now. We're going to keep the lid on it, but we got some really big news. We're very excited about it. We saw a tease of it on Monday. Oh, it's so exciting. So we'll talk about that soon, and you will all be part of that. There may be some discounts, Chuck, that we can give to our listeners. I don't know. We'll see.
I think so.
All right. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.